welcome to the Product Circle. I'm so glad that you could make it this evening. We do have a very interesting lineup, and myself, Libby Evans, will be going through this with you very shortly. I'm sure that you're used to seeing Duncan, and I do actually work alongside Duncan, and I will be helping him out with the events going forward within the UX and UI design space, as this is something that I specialise within. So it's been a real honour to be able to get involved with the Product Circle and have the opportunity to speak with so many high caliber, industry leaders throughout the whole of the UX and UI design space. Even the speakers this evening, having speaking to them about some of their projects and some of, the topics that they're speaking about has been a great interest of mine, and it's a passion, the UX and UI design industry and space. So we do have, as I said, 3 amazing speakers for this evening. So I am really grateful that you could all make it to be able to listen to 3 amazing topics at the moment that are really big within the industry. So our first speaker is Judyta, who will actually be speaking about stereotype versus actually real life designers. And I know this has been a real topic at the moment within the industry. I did actually catch up with herself, and she was really, really passionate about this, as I know that it can be difficult, the difference between a UX designer, what it actually is like to be a UX designer or a UI designer, rather than what people think a UI and a UX designer do on a day-to-day basis. So I know that she's got a lot of really interesting content to share with all of you. And then straight after that, she will actually be discussing and open to conversations with yourself. So she'll be doing a Q&A there, which will allow you to ask as many questions that you do have, share your opinions if you have a slight different opinion on anything that she may have mentioned, and really be able to conversate back with Judyta and let her know your thoughts on her presentation as well. Straight after that, we do actually have Matteo, who will be talking about something a little bit different. So this is something that, again, is really, really of interest to Matteo. He's very, very passionate about it. And I have actually, again, watched the presentation that Matteo has put together, and it was great. A lot of content there for you all to be listening to and really taking in within the industry if it is also something that you're passionate about. So Matteo will be discussing sort of within the environment, so within HW and SW environments, and the complex interaction with this. This goes really, really deep into sort of the industry specifics, and again, a lot of things that I'll be taking notes on with Matteo. A lot of really good content there that he's been able to push out for you guys. And last but not least, we've got Rachel, who will be speaking about design sprints. I've been hearing about design sprints a lot throughout sort of the last 3 weeks within the market. Really, really interesting topic at the moment. I know everyone's got a lot to say about this topic and different opinions on particular things and how their organisations tend to have different processes. So Rachel has put together a great presentation for you guys, explaining things in further detail. And again, Rachel will also be doing a Q&A after this, where you'll really be able to, share different projects that you may have worked on, different processes, and it will really give you an opportunity to speak to some industry leaders. And I know that there's a lot of amazing people within the industry on here. So yeah, hopefully this is an opportunity to network and really, really understand some of the topics that these speakers and presentations that they've put together. So you will actually be seeing me a lot more, and I hope you enjoy the evening. Please let me know your thoughts and let me know how you found the event. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Judyta Borkowska, and I'm coming here today to talk to you about strategical aspects of the UX. So I have been doing a bit of reading recently, and I found out that there isn't an awful lot of resources out there talking about design strategy. So here I am trying to close this little gap to get everybody on the same page, and let's define what design is at the very basic level. Personally, I like to think of design as a problem-solving method. There seems to be a common misconception out there that designers equal creatives, which is not necessarily true. Obviously, you have some very skilled designers that are really good at art and being creative. But I think design at the very basic level is trying to solve a problem with the use of visuals, which is the art aspect that people seem to fixate on. So I have this little neat definition for you. Design is a problem-solving method characterized by the use of visuals. And you can't solve something if you don't know what it is. So at the very beginning, we need to start with something called problem statement. So think of it as a timeline. We are here at the very beginning. We have the problem, and at the other end, we have the goal. And design is figuring out how do we get there, the center of the line. So I'm going to give you an example of a problem statement just to illustrate how it could look like. It's just one sentence basically, but that sentence is going to drive your whole design exercise. So for example, we need a way to locate and remove discriminatory graffiti in London because we want to see racism eradicated. So I have highlighted the problem and the goal in this sentence, and it's very clear that you have a problem that currently there is a lot of discriminatory graffiti in London. And why do we want to do this? Is because we want to see racism eradicated. That's our higher level goal, the end goal, right? If that happens, we have succeeded, right? And the designer's goal is to figure out the way how to get there. And that is called strategy. When we have the problem statement, it's going to be much easier for us to reach the goal because it's something that can guide us throughout the way. And whenever we start a new project, we should always ask, what is your problem statement? What is it trying to solve? What are you trying to achieve? And we should never assume that we know what the goal is. So never assume. And the reason is because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. So never assume, because that's what happens when you do. So as I said, having a good problem statement increases your success chance. And why do we do that? We're trying to see the way from the problem to the goal in one short sentence that can guide us. And how do we get there? Well, ask any person, ask 100 people, you'll get 100 different replies. How do we get there? But there are 3 major things that you need to keep in mind. How do we get there and make money? So you will be asked that from a business perspective, because ultimately companies are there to make money, right? And as UX designers, we need to also facilitate their needs. How do we get there with the stuff we have? That's the development part of it. So you can do a brilliant prototype, beautiful art, beautiful splash screens, but we only have a limited technology that we can use to make it. And I guarantee you will get some pushback from your concerned devs about feasibility of your vision. When it comes to actual implementation, there will be a lot of questions. So we need to think about that beforehand. Also, how do we get there and have fun? Well, having fun is a broad statement, but yeah, that's what users want. They just want a pleasant experience. They don't want to get angry at your product, at your solution. So here we are, UX designers. What do we want? How do we get there? So we want to keep everybody somewhat happy. By everyone, I mean the business development and the users. We have to connect the dots on the way. So I put somewhat in that sentence because obviously we all know it doesn't always play out as we intended to. But somewhat is a good place to start. So here is all that put into one succinct sentence. How can we solve the problem and make people happy with the assets we have and make profit while we at it? That is the big UX question. And if you find a way to solve that question, then yeah, that's your UX designer sweet spot. And I don't know if you've seen this previously, that triangle. So it talks about viability, the feasibility and desirability. If your solution tackles all those 3 points, it has a really high chance of success. So viability, that's from the business perspective, is that solution viable? Means, is it going to make us money? Feasibility is from the development perspective. Is it possible with the tools that we have? And desirability, do people want it? Because at the end of the day, if nobody wants it, we have a problem there. And well, enough of the introduction. Let's talk about the actual design strategy. So design strategy's purpose is to have a way of getting from the problem to the goal. It's not just a shot in the dark. There are steps that we can take to increase our success chance. And I'm going to ask you a few questions that design strategy should cover. To begin with, what is the current state of things? We're at the very beginning. We only have a problem. We don't have any solutions yet, so we have to figure out what are we working with. We need to find out about our users and market. So that would be a very first step. Then we need to find out what kind of technology do we have available. That's from the dev perspective. And also quite important, what finances do we have? Who's going to pay for it? Who are the stakeholders? What is the goal? So we're going to look into the future and think about what is the user's ultimate goal and what is the business ultimate goal. We already know the business ultimate goal, right? If you think back to the example, we want to see racism eradicated, but what is the user goal? How does the user benefit from that? And how do we get there? That is the middle line between the problem and the goal. So the action on the company that you're working with, the clients that you're working with. Personally, I prefer design thinking because it includes that quite important step to me, which is empathize. Yeah, but it depends what your company capabilities are. For example, design sprint, you can run along the Agile Scrum teams. Yeah, just pick one, whichever suits you best. And one question that everybody seems to forget about is, how will we know if we got there, right? We can produce solutions upon solutions, but at which point do we say, right, we have reached our goal, this is it, guys, we succeeded or we failed? And for that, we have all those scary words like revenue, conversion, engagement, awareness. Oh my God, UX designers need to look at those things and review progress on a regular basis. It's not as flashy aspect to the UX profession as prototyping and ideation, but the data-driven design is really important for UX people. Yeah, please guys, don't forget about measuring your success as you're gonna iterate your prototypes into infinity and beyond. Very important step. Do not forget, define your success. Why am I talking about design process? It's because designers, we have a lot of creative freedom, right? We're not equal to artists, but we do have a lot of creative freedom. And at the end of the day, we are here to solve a problem and we're getting paid for it. And there is time and place for everything, right? There is time for work and time for play. And having a defined process makes this whole design consistent and gives you a dedicated time and space where you can unleash your creative freedom. So you're not prototyping and creating journey maps and forever, iteration is important, and that is a part of the design process, but there is time and place for everything. At some point, your ideation phase ends and you start prototyping. At some point, your prototyping phase ends and you start developing, and then you loop back. So there is time and place for everything. So don't think about design process as restricting your creative freedoms. It's out there to give you that freedom when the time is right. And another thing, why shouldn't you discard the strategy and design process? It's because challenge promotes growth. When you give yourself the restriction of time and space, you will come up with better ideas and you'll come up with ideas faster because you're on a limited schedule and you have to work with a certain constraint. So it serves both in your professional life to have some sort of integrity and your personal life and your personal growth. So yeah, please consider strategy and design process with your next big design process. And who knows, you might just love it. And a little summary for you. So I said many times, design is not art. Obviously, designers can be artists and they can be quite creative, but design does not equal art. There is some sort of overlap, but at the very basic, design is a problem-solving method. You have a problem and you have a goal, and design is figuring out how to get there while using visuals. So a good problem statement is essential for success. If you know what you're doing, if you know what you're solving, and you know where you want to be, it's much easier to figure out how to get there. It's much easier to formulate strategy. And UX as a profession is the act of balancing the feasibility, viability, and desirability with strong focus on user needs. I think a lot of UX designers, they're big user advocates, user experience professional in real life out there. We have other aspects that we also have to look after, like business needs and developer feasibility, technological feasibility. We can't discard everything else and go blindly user needs. As harsh as it sounds, that's the real life. We are employed to solve problems and we get paid for it. And if we can solve those problems with a high focus on user needs, that is absolute win. And design strategy, design process, they don't restrict your creative freedom. They only give you time and space for it, the right time and space. So if you apply design strategy and follow a design process, and who knows, that constraint might help you grow professionally, personally. because challenge promotes growth. And very last point, UX design is not easy. I know it's a lot to take in. We have a lot to do as UX designers. We have to empathize, we have to do ideation, we have to do prototype and design, and think about strategy, and think about business goals, and think about all these things. It's not easy. I wish you very best luck out there, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And whenever anyone tells you, oh, UX designer, I can do some prototyping as well, tell them, no, actually, UX design is not as easy as you think. Design is not just, drawing squares and buttons. It's more than that. It's strategy, it's design process, it's discovery, it's finding out how to get from one point to the other, keeping all those three parties happy, somewhat happy. There's never ideal path out there, while keeping everybody happy. I think that's all from me. Please feel free to research more into design strategy. I hope I piqued your curiosity about it, and have a beautiful day.
Yeah, that was a really, really great event from Judyta. Really, really good speak. I think we've got a few questions as well from Judyta. Go over to Matteo first. Matteo, did you have any questions for Judyta at all?
Yeah, before the question, I just want to point out that I really like that Judyta smiled all the time, which is something I really love. Congratulations for that. Yeah, I've got a few questions and actually a few points. The first one is I really agree with the idea of that reality is business and devs and users are at the same time something we have to care about. For our audience, do you have any trick or anything that you used to take in consideration all those things together?
What do you mean by trick?
It's back to the reality. In the day-to-day job, we have to show the business, we have to show the devs that we take in consideration also their requirements, not only the users, even if we are the users advocates, as you rightly pointed out. If you just have anything that can help others to deal with it.
I think talking to people is number one thing. Asking questions. You have before you jump into working on a project, you have to talk to stakeholders and have a discovery phase where you find out what are their needs, what are their capabilities, what sort of finances do we have, what can we afford from the business perspective, and talk to the developers ideally before the design handoff. So
yeah, I totally agree. Thanks for that. And the other one was you pointed out that the process enhances your freedom and not the opposite, and I totally agree with that view. Not only process, not only the strategy, also any framework you're going to use is they are meant to give you more time to think carefully at what really is the point, so the user needs and the rest of your work. They are constraints, but at the same time they will help. This is something I just wanted to point out strongly because you rightly pointed out very, very strongly.
Design, data-driven design and informed design are definitely a strong win.
Yeah. Cool. That's it for me, Libby.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, definitely a really, really great talk there. And I think we've got quite a few questions for yourself, Judyta, on the side. So just to go from the top then. So we've got a question from Paul. Do you think UX designers should help define the problem statement, not just solve the problem?
Well, I would say that depends at which point in the project lifecycle are you being brought in as a UX designer? I think if you're in a position when the project starts, you absolutely should be a part of that definition. But sometimes we join a company that already has a defined problem statement, and that's just what we have to work with. The best we can do is do some independent research of our own and see how can we support that problem statement.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. That's a good question from Paul as well. Another question for yourself, Judyta, from Karen. So aren't problem statements often the other way around? She said, we need to eradicate racism, job to be done. Therefore, we might, for example, locate and remove discriminatory graphics. And then she also said, leaving space for other solutions as well.
Yeah, so the problem statement I have chosen, I tried to keep it simple. So what problem statement should tell you is why are you want to do certain thing, and what do you want to do? Sorry, the other way around. What do you want to do and why do you want to do it? But it doesn't tell you how to do it. So in this example, imagine you were a graffiti removal company, right? So you want to see racism eradicated. That would be your why. And what is you need to find and remove the graffiti. So from that perspective.
Okay, brilliant. Well done, Judyta. Some more questions for yourself. Definitely had a good amount of questions coming in. So from Shebel, what happened to the UX architect role? Has it become a UX designer or product designer role? What's your opinion on that, Judyta?
I think there is still, I mean, UX is a still fresh term out there in the job market. I think companies define UX designers, UX architects, however they understand it. It's not necessarily true to the definition. And I think UX designers are more often than not all-arounders. We usually go through all the design phases, like, you know, even doing a bit of content strategy and stuff like that. That's also a UX role, I guess. Yeah, I think modern UX designers should try a little bit of everything and then specialize, like become UX architects or interaction designer, if you please, or UX content writers and such. Yes, I think that role still exists. It could have been absorbed into a generic UX designer role at some point.
Brilliant, thanks, Judith. And I think someone also, Paul, mentioned that they also have UX architects in their company as well. And then following on from that, I think that the final question for yourself from another Paul is, should a UX designer have visual design skills, Judith?
UX, well, depends on, I hate to say it like the job title, but there is a design UX designer role. I think it really depends on the company and on the job, on your responsibilities that are expected of you. It's definitely a bonus. Like myself, I have a front-end development background, right? So I do a bit of a front-end developer also with the UX. So it definitely helps. It's good to have broad horizons just to support your more specific UX skills. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well,
it helps.
I think we've just had another question coming from Karen as well. So if you see problem statement that way in light of a company that does one thing and offers one solution, it feels more like a justification of why do something than a real problem statement. And she said, with a one more open problem statement, they might realize they could or they should also offer other solutions.
Yeah, that's absolutely a valid point. Yeah, as I said, the example I have given, I try to be very simple. It's not from a real company, but yeah, absolutely. You should have as broad problem statement as possible that can guide you throughout your design, but doesn't tell you how to do your job, basically. So you have that creative freedom to explore all the solutions.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for everyone who's asked the questions. Matteo, did you have any other questions for Judyta at all?
I was muted as usual. I'm sorry. No, I just want to point out that at the beginning, Judyta said, it is fun, and I will point it out exactly in the end of my presentation, so it is fun.
Yeah, well done. Great talk.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much to the Product Cycle UX team for having me this evening. I'm super excited to talk with you about one topic that is definitely in my heart, which is complex interaction in hardware and software environments. Just before starting this talk, I want to talk about myself just a bit. Currently, I'm Vice President of Experience Design at Barclays Corporate Bank. But what I'm going to talk with you this evening is related with my previous job as a head of design at Midas Console. Please feel free to contact me through LinkedIn, particularly this is my main social network, or Twitter. So start this talk with this big question: why are we going to talk about hardware and software? I think that everyone of you already saw a few times this view of the spacecraft Dragon from SpaceX within the American astronauts. They were interacting with big touch screens and some buttons, and with that they drove the spacecraft itself. So hardware and software, complex hardware and software environments are already within us. Before going forward, I'm just going to show you a bit of things related with the topic. So what are the different domains where those complex interaction behave? First one that every one of us knows quite well is car. In cars, we've got big dashboards, and this is an old concept from the 1982 within the Lancia Orca. And as you can see, there is a big dashboard with a big pad in the middle with a lot of buttons. But actually, this is something that is already here today. As you can see, this is the Python M-Type car that's been released last year. And the concept inside the steering wheel is pretty similar, just with a big touch screen instead, a bunch of buttons. And actually, in this car, there are a lot of more complex interactions because you can control stuff just with gesture recognitions, etc. And there is a big screen in front of the driver and also the passengers, etc., etc. But I'm not going to talk about the UX of that, just about the interactions. What happened about the airplanes? Because the airplanes cockpits of airplanes are another big area and domain. So this is a very early ages of the airplane, and in the 1916, you can see there were just a bunch of manometers and a baseball bat to manage the airplane. But just in the 1950s, 1960s, this is a DC-9, but there are a lot of different options that you can have a look at in the web. The complexity started to be big, but at the same time, everything was still similar. Just a bunch of items, a lot of items in this case, and instead of baseball bat, a sort of joystick, and some pedals as well, etc., etc. But today they are starting to design cockpits like that, where there are a lot of screens that hide complex interaction and information within a joystick to drive. This is actually not for an airplane. This is a helicopter one, but I saw in the past something related with the airplanes as well. What happens in the spacecraft? So this is the first Explorer one, the Apollo 11 in the 1969 went to the moon, and actually, as you can see, there were plenty of buttons, a lot of complexity and stuff that all the astronauts had to memorize in order to manage the spacecraft itself. What happened within the space shuttle? Just the complexity went far away, a lot of extra monitors, but still everything was managed with buttons, faders, knobs, etc., etc. And this is what we already saw before, the today dashboards that SpaceX provided with the Space Dragon. It is also interesting to, if you want to double check what happened within this dashboard, because you can have a look at the Space Dragon version 2 on the web, which was a bit different from this one, with two big screens, a lot of extra buttons in the middle, etc., etc. So they made the iterations on the dashboard as well. And now we're going to talk about my domain, that was the audio. So mixing consoles. A mixing console is what is taking the sound from the instruments and from the microphone of the singer, etc., mix it all together and put it in front of the audience or for the recorder. So in the early 60s, this is the mixing console that the Beatles were using. As you can see, there are a lot of knobs, faders, etc., etc. What happened in the moving between analog and digital consoles is just they added a lot of extra complexities. As you can see, there are a lot of faders here, some screens, but the screens are more just an overview of what is happening in the hardware. And actually, because they had to hide stuff because there were too many channels, too many information and parameters for each channel, the screens are there in order to help, to organize things. And nowadays we are in something like that. This is what I managed and I designed when I was the head of design in Mendes consoles. This is a completely different concept where the actual software can manage the console completely in isolation without the hardware as well, if you want. And so the hardware is there in order to help, because in the live environments, you need to be quick to do stuff. And we are going to see later that you've got something that is related with muscle memory, etc., etc. And so it is important for sound engineers to have also hardware items. But in this case, the software is driving everything. The next step is, what are the differences between hardware and software? So hardware versus software. First of all, hardware. Hardware needs fixed parameters and controls. Each knob means something, and rather than in special cases, that knob, that button can just perform that action. And this is also why it is a real-time environment, because you touch, and when you touch a button, something happens and go. You can't control anything more than that. If you touch a knob, you move it a bit, you change the volume, or you change something. If you move a fader, you change again the volume or other parameters, etc., etc. It is something where the muscle memory works very, very well, because you can manage and drive a console, you can manage and drive a car, you can manage and drive an airplane, more or less with blind eyes, because after a while you know where everything sits and you can just touch the elements and move them a bit. And if you are a sound engineer in this case, because we are talking about mixing console, you're using your ears and you can just manage stuff. So it is super important, it's super interesting that sound engineers are looking at the musicians on the stage and they are managing the hardware without even look at it many times. They also have some cons, like they are super expensive, because in order to design and produce hardware, you have to create something that is big. Every single prototype costs a lot. Iteration on the hardware costs a lot as well, because you have to create the prototype itself, etc., etc. It is difficult to be updated because it is difficult to change one element to add a new one that is more efficient or more modern, or etc., etc. So you usually, when you want to change something in a car, you are just going to change the entire car. You are not going to change the dashboard of the car. The hardware is also heavy and big, and this is something that is very important in this era. Also, if you think at a spacecraft or airplanes, one of the reasons behind the movement towards the digital environment is about heaviness and size and saving space. Because of course, if you have to send to the space 10 kilos or 1 kilo, it makes a lot of difference. And in the audio environments, if you need a console that use 2 rooms or a console that can stay on my legs, it changes a lot, etc., etc. So those are important things related with hardware. And as you can see here, this is just hardware console. You can see you've got the faders, a lot of buttons, knobs and rotaries, other buttons, etc., etc. All the parameters in this case, because this is an analog consoles, are exposed, and you can manage one channel or the audio in the channel. Even, again, just with blind eyes, you touch it, you know where they are, and you can memorize it, and you're able to manage it. What about software? So software can hide information, which is super important, because in an era where we've got plenty of parameters we want to control at the same time, plenty of options we want to control at the same time, and we are reducing the size of the elements, so we are going to hide a lot of other things. They should be available in other ways, and the software will help in that way. It is also real time, and at the same time, it is also asynchronous. It means that you can use it for configurations, and you can perform actions that will not be reflected in real time, which is important, because real time means that is dangerous. If you made a mistake, you made a mistake. Luckily, I was managing audio and not lives. So the worst thing that can happen is that the audience can't hear the audio of the gig. But if you're driving an airplane and you made a mistake, actually it could be very dangerous. It is dangerous in the audio as well, because a sound engineer can lose his job if the concert is just gone, etc., etc. The software can monitor the hardware then. So this is another important bit. It is also cheap. It's definitely cheaper than the hardware, because you have to develop it, but you have to also develop the hardware. But iterate and recreate stuff related with the software is a lot easier and cheaper. And it's also easy to update. You can update everything. You are used to update your mobile phone quite a lot of times, or the apps on your mobile phones quite a lot of times. Actually, with the SaaS services now, we are not updating them anymore because they've been updated for us. And of course, you don't have any size constraint rather than the size of the actual memory and small hardware that you need in order to drive and to run the software. And this is just an example of, again, the mixing console I designed, the software of it. As you can see, it's a big touch screen, and you can perform a lot of things, and you can see a lot of things, hide a lot of things, etc., etc. The complexity, of course, increased a lot. And now the main topic of this talk, so hardware and software interactions. It is a super interesting topic, and it is a very difficult one because there are not too many research available about it. And even if nowadays we can see a lot of new products that use this extensively, those interactions, they actually are not writing papers or articles we can read about them. I'm super curious about, for instance, the SpaceX research about them, but they are not available at the moment. I don't know if any one of you read the articles about the battleship, the American battleship that was driven by mixed hardware and software product. They actually had issues and an accident, and the U.S. Navy decided to remove those touch screens and went back to something more analog rather than digital. Again, I don't know anything about the research that was behind that. I just know that I spent 4 years trying to design the mixing console that I'm talking about. And definitely there are a lot of other things that can be researched about and can be found and can be made better. So there are a few points related to interactions between hardware and software. The first one that to me is the most important one is that there are a lot of domains of interaction when you are interacting between hardware and software, because there is an hardware and software interaction that is not human managed. It's just what happens between the hardware and the software, and you have to see the same thing happen. Then there, of course, there is an hardware to human interaction. So as a sound engineer, I'm mixing the audio and I'm using the hardware. And there is a software and human interaction. So as a sound engineer, I'm touching the screen and I'm managing the audio through the screen, etc., etc. And on top of everything, there are a lot of other interactions that can happen. In my case, it was the audio interaction. So audio went through the console and went to the hardware, went to the software, and all the kind of interaction that happened had the audio as a fourth layer of interactions. That was in the base, but without the audio, you couldn't also even test and prototype anything, because the audio was the main part of it. It's the same within an airplane. You need something that flight, at least simulator, but should be able to fly it, etc., etc. So this is a super important bit, and this is a tiny video that show you the console in action. You can see the audio that is coming through. The meters are moving because the audio, and now we can see in the bottom here, here in the bottom, that the fader is moving because that guy is moving a fader on the screen. So this is a reflection of what happens in the software to the hardware, etc. And the same with the knobs that the guy is turning around on the screen. The second point was something that I already talked about a bit, is about mask memory. The hardware is easy to memorize, the software is not. But we discovered that one of the reasons a lot of sound engineers are so used to skeuomorphic views and is because they can remember them quite well, because they looks like something that is related with the analog world, the hardware itself. So this is an example. The top image is a plugin, a physical plugin that you're using, and the second one is what we designed for the console. As you can see, it reminds quite a lot to the original analog version of it, and the skeuomorphism has been really well accepted by the sound engineers. Of course, it is not only skeuomorphism, is because it's digital, you can add other things that in the analog world you can't. So for instance, the values of the input and outputs are only in the digital world, because in the analog one you didn't have any screen, so you couldn't see anything, etc., etc. So you can create something that helps the sound engineers quite a lot, adding stuff that are more digital to something that looks more analog. And yeah, this is an example of how the same concept, the same pattern is being used in many different areas. So the first one, the top one, is the default view for the channels, and the others are the two plugins that I designed, etc. The third point is that you've got real-time feedback, because in hardware and software interaction, you can't have any lag between the hardware and software. If I touch something on the hardware, it should be reflected automatically and in real time to the software, and vice versa. If something happened with the audio, it should be reflected in the hardware, in the software as well, without any lag, etc., etc. And this is a reason because of many hardware and software products have light UIs with not too many shadows or blur, just light animation or no animation at all, and just because, for instance, in my case, I had to respect at least 60 frame rates per second. Actually, I made a mistake here per minute, but it was per second in each for any view I created. So it is super important to be super quick. It's like a game environment, if you want, in some ways. This is just a very quick example that show you that there are no animation, it looks quite flat. So there are games and trick we had to create it in order to give the users the perception of a bit more three-dimensionality, etc., etc. The fourth point, and the last one, is about consistent interaction. You need to have a consistent interaction between the hardware and the software. If you turn a knob on the hardware, you need to turn a knob on the software. If you press a button in the hardware, the button action to press it in the software should be similar. If you move a fader in the hardware, the same movement is the movement you have to do in order to perform moving a fader on the software. The fader, the meters, we saw before the meters that were moving, they should move in the same way between the hardware and the software, etc., etc. It is super important that everything that should be consistent all across the system. And here we can see a bigger view of those knobs. As you can see, the knobs, you're using your finger around the knob. Instead, what usually you can see in audio tools where to move, to rotate a knob or a rotary or whatever, you are moving the mouse up and down and not, you're not turning it around. This is, of course, something we could realize because it is a touch environment, so you don't have to use the mouse. So we are in the end. Conclusions. The first one, it is probably the most important one, is the continuum between hardware and software is key. You need to have a continuum and a connection between hardware and software, and everything that happened in the hardware should be reflected in the software and vice versa. In order to design interactions, you need to take in consideration all the different domains of interaction from the beginning. You can't design one button without thinking how the button works in the hardware. You can't design an element that moves and show a volume change without taking in consideration what happened in the hardware, etc., etc. It is super important that you take in consideration those things from the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to redesign them many, many, many times. Muscle memory in complex environments research still to be done. This is important, as I mentioned before. There are not too many papers available, not too many articles available about those things. A few articles and papers available are related usually with the army and particularly airplanes, and they are usually quite old. I know that there are studies that are coming through and they've been released in the last 1 year and a half, 2 years, but still there is a lot of things to be done, and it's a super interesting area for us designers. And of course, there is still space for skeuomorphism. Complex interaction in products requires long-term projects. In order to create a physical product, you need to spend time. It is not something that you can realize in a few months. As I said, I've been in Midas console for 4 years working on that project, just that project, and actually the engineering team started quite a lot before I joined the team. So just to design a mixing console is a 5 to 6 years project. If you think an airplane, if you think a car, if you think all those projects are long-term projects, and this is an interesting point to point out. And the last one is, it is definitely fun. I enjoyed every single moment I spent designing that console, and I really would love to see more designers being involved in those kind of projects, because it's an area where us as designers are super required, are super needed, but many times those projects are being managed by engineers, and even the design is managed by engineers. When I joined the company, the designers were more or less asset producer. We did something, the team did something before I joined, but we were not so involved in each single area of the design of the console as we were in the end. Not only because of me, but because of the team, and because of the entire team, engineering team, the bosses that saw how important it was to involve us. Say that, thank you very much for having me again, and please feel free to contact me through LinkedIn or Twitter.
Yeah, great talk, Matteo, there. I've got a few questions as well, but really good talk. Some great content in there as well. I think a few people have been having a few conversations about some of the content that you've mentioned. Did you have any questions, Judyta, in the first instance?
Yes, it's really interesting talk. Actually, I've been thinking about two situations, like with autonomous cars, for example. I can't remember the model, but there was a car that had replaced the manual gearbox with just like what was it? Like a little switch or something instead of the manual stick, and it caused a lot of drama and accidents. And yes, I think replacing hardware with software in that case wasn't a very wise decision. But on the other hand, I've been thinking about another situation with I don't know if you've heard about the flight 148, was it, back in 1992, where the pilot had a manual board in the plane, and the pilot knew the plane, had years of experience, but unfortunately, due to the muscle memory, he changed the mode to a different mode, which caused the plane to just plummet down into a mountain. Very unfortunate accident. So in that case, hardware failed. So what sort of tasks or what sort of situations do you think software would be better, or what sort of situations hardware would be better? Because obviously there is time and place for each one.
Yeah.
What was your
you added
thoughts?
an extra level of complexity, which is the automation. So how much we should automate stuff. I didn't touch that point by design in this presentation because it added a topic that is too wide for just 20 minutes. But the problem is, I don't think that hardware can be completely removed, and at the same time software needs to drive stuff, but we need to be able to know how to switch the controls between the two. So that, of course, the software helps a lot when you have to configure stuff and do stuff like that, because you can reduce the space completely. You can remove all the buttons that are just there for one configuration one at a time, and then you're not going to touch them anymore for the entire flight, for instance, or for the entire concert, etc. For everything that is you should use during the live work, I think that at least the redundancy is a good thing. I saw that there are a lot of users that were able to swap to the touch screen environment quite easily, but at the same time they relied on the hardware one, because they said, okay, if I need to jump quickly, this is something that I I already know, and I know that it didn't fail, because this is the other bit. You can have failure both in the hardware and the software, but if the hardware failed, everything is gone. If the software failed, you can still drive something within the hardware. So it is difficult to say where something is properly better. I personally think that there are things that should be driven by the hardware, and things that should be driven by the software. But the software can substitute a lot of things and can hide a lot of complexity. The problem is that you have to be very, very smart in hide the right complexity and being able to show the user that this is a problem somewhere, and to make it available like a shortcut or something that let him to go quickly in the area where he can solve the problem, or she can solve the problem.
Yeah, I guess you have to utilize the progressive disclosure as best as you can in the right places.
Definitely, that was our big job. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Judyta and Matteo. There's a few other questions for yourself, Matteo. So the first question from TextBacks. As a 15-year-old UI UX designer, what would be the first step I take to take off my UI and UX career further?
A big question. I think that's, first of all, I bet that as a 15 years old, you're very passionate about it, and this is something that will drive you forever, and this is something you have to invest on about quite a lot, because as designers we can't stop to think as designers. We are just thinking at it continuously all day long, also during the night. And this is something that will drive you for your career as well. You are very young, so I would say you can still try to understand exactly what you really like about it and find something to focus on. And you've got time where you can spend to focus on one area or focus on another one. And so my suggestion is investigate the more you can. Judyta said before that you can be quite a generalist in some ways. At least you should know different areas and domains inside the design domain, which is a big one. You've got time. Investigate specific areas. Be try to be very good in one area, and which is something that you like, and go for it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Really great question there as well. The second question for yourself, Matteo, is actually, is the voice the way to go for vehicle UI? And that's with Judyta, and that is the way to go for, is that the way to go, the voice, sorry, for vehicle UI?
Of course, the voice UI is something that is getting bigger and bigger, and I think that is part of the future, is not the entire future. Mm-hmm. We will have, as I mentioned in the Byton car, we have already gesture recognition, so you can turn up the volume and down the volume, just pointing your finger and move your finger up and down, so left and right, actually turning it left and right. So this is another bit that I think is important for the future as well. Again, I think that the right combination between the different interfaces is the key point. So where the voice can manage things, why not? But there are also areas where probably the voice is not the best one, because maybe there is also a passenger, and you have to understand which is the guy that is giving the proper command, etc., etc. So there are a lot of things that should be discovered yet and developed yet. But yeah, it's a super interesting point, and yeah, I think the voice interface will be part of the cars quite soon. It's a domain that is evolving quite quickly.
Definitely.
I'd like to build a little bit on that. As UX designers, we have to consider various disabilities as well. We can't really commit to it's only voice or it's only, visuals. We need to think about people who are hard of hearing, or maybe they're mute, maybe different languages. How speech to text is not perfect these days. There is a lot of mistakes, and translating from other languages and such. So there are still advances to be made in other areas before we can commit to using voice for something such, high risk as driving a car.
Yeah, but absolutely. If you think also at the console, I was part of the design of course, the hardware, if you are completely blind, the software and the touchscreen is not reliable.
Yes.
Hardware. Of course, when you're taking consideration as a UX designer, I didn't take into consideration that in this presentation, but of course we did it during our job. This is the key, and this is also the reason I said I would say that the right approach is to use the different options we have in designing interfaces, the different interfaces we have, in order to have the proper design, the proper product in the end.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Matteo and Judyta, on that. Really, really, really good. We've got a few more questions for yourself. So again, from Judyta, what are the main differences between designing the UX of a piece of hardware and designing the UX of a site or an app?
There are a lot. The first one is that usually you don't have the users and you can test it quite easily with them. And you actually can't prototype something and send them through, I don't know, an email or just a URL, because you need to send them an entire prototype and an entire hardware. And this is the main difference at the beginning. Many times the projects are super long term. As I mentioned, I worked on it for 4 years, but the company has been on that for a lot more. So usually, because you are designing and creating something that will arrive in 5 years, you're not gonna release anything about it in advance. So you've got strict NDAs, and you have to find someone that will test them in safe environments, and you will invite them in in your office, and so they can test it in your prototype there. And this is more or less everywhere, also in cars environments, in airplanes. It's not only where we were. And the other bit is when I designed that console, and this happened for many other areas. Like I know someone in the aerospace sector, and they got the same issue. You have an entire new operating system. So the system is developed and designed for that product. It means that also the graphic engine is designed for that. You don't have interactions, you don't have animations, you don't have anything. You have to create everything from scratch. And this is also fun because it's like our play area as designers, because we have to create everything from scratch. It's our dream to do it. At the same time, it is difficult and it's super long, because the user expectation is that if you touch a button, you've got something like you have in your phone, or you have when you touch a button on a website, but you have to develop it from scratch. And usually the point and the focus of the company is more on the reliability, usability, bug fixing, etc., rather than making the stuff nice and looks with a like looks moving good, because of course they should look good, but it is not only an image. You should move between the image, you should create the animations and transitions, etc. You have and this is something that it's difficult to ask the company to focus on. I don't know if this is enough. There are a lot of
That's brilliant. Thank you, Matteo. That's brilliant. Yeah, some more questions for yourself, and also some good feedback as well from Paul. But Zully has a question for you, Matteo. Are you aware of more hardware-related UX opportunities for the standard digital UX designer?
I don't think I understood completely the question.
No, that's absolutely.
Can you repeat it, please?
Yes. So, are you aware of more hardware-related UX opportunities for the standard digital UX designer?
Yes, there are a lot. It's still a niche, because usually it's still something that is very expensive, because you have to prototype something from scratch. Prototyping hardware is super expensive, as I mentioned in the presentation. And so it is still for products that are quite in a niche, like the mixing consoles, or an airplane, or cars. Cars is probably the most the less niche area where we can deal with both of the areas, software and hardware. But there are a lot actually in the real world. There are a lot of opportunities you can look for. There are a lot of music companies that are creating stuff like musical instruments or a synthesizer that are managing both hardware and software. And actually designers are super needed everywhere, because many times you've got developers and engineers that are designing products in a very good way, but I think that as designers we can make them even better, and we can help them to be more bright. There are a lot of opportunities if you want to go in that direction. And yeah, it is just completely different than what usually we are looking at. So websites, apps in the mobile environment, or software in general.
I think what you're looking for is a shift from a UX designer into a product designer.
I don't know. I'm not with something.
I think that's the opportunity that you're searching for.
To me, we are all designers in the end.
It's just job title by the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I would try to search for actually companies that are in a domain that I would love to work with. So, for instance, I'm happy and I want to work with the car industry. I'm gonna look for I don't know, in England I would go for Barclays, for instance, and try to understand if they've got any UX or design team and trying to understand if they got any position, or Jaguar, and I know that they have those teams. Or if I want to be in the musical industry, I want to go, I don't know, in London there are a few companies that are producing hardware as well, or in Berlin, or where there are a lot of companies. It is a matter to search and trying to understand if they got a design team. If they don't, why not to propose?
Brilliant. Thank you, Matteo. I know we've got lots and lots of questions for yourself, but I do know that Rachel is waiting quite patiently and urgently. She wants to give you guys her talk. So just one last question for yourself, and then we will be doing the Q&A afterwards to answer all of the following questions. So the final question for yourself, Matteo, is from Tom. So would you say that software would become the leader in product development over hardware?
It is a combination of the two. A software can't work without an hardware. So we can say also the opposite. Of course, the more advanced is the software, the less we need hardware controls, probably. But again, as we mentioned before, everything is based on the balance between the two, and also the purpose of the product you are producing. Because if I'm producing something that should be super cheap, like a mixing console, super cheap, I can create something probably inside a mobile phone or a an iPad or something like that, and it will work. Of course, it is not the same than a console that will be used by the Beatles or any other big tour or stuff like that. So yeah, you should balance the requirement based on a lot of different things, and this is going back to the Judyta design strategy point. Everything is based on that. You should analyze it and try to find the right balancing between the two. Many times, even if you're designing a mobile app, we are just not thinking that there is an hardware that is driving them. But there is a mobile phone at least, or when we are designing a website, there is a hardware and we've got a mouse, and someone is managing the software with a mouse. Someone is also using the software with a touchscreen, even if in a desktop environment. And many times we are using super small buttons anyway, which is wrong for them. So we have to think about the reality of the things we are going to design for. But software can control the hardware better and better. So the combination between the two is something that is growing up a lot, and the software is taking control of it partially, I think, yes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matteo. Definitely a really, really good talk there from yourself. A lot of interesting content that I know a lot of people are really, really interested in, have a lot of questions for yourself. So we'll continue with the questions afterwards, but I know Rachel is wanting to share her presentation with you quite urgently. So we're now going to go over to Rachel from Google, who has a presentation for yourself.
Thanks, Al. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you hanging out, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you. I think it seems like a really excited audience. There's a lot of questions, and I'm going to do my best to do it justice. So yes, as you've heard, I'm Rachel. I'm a UX designer at Google. I've been there for over 7 years now. I worked on a few different teams, Chrome. I'm currently on the search team. I spent a little time working on Duo as well. And as you've heard, I'm going to speak today to the topic of design sprints and jams and make-a-thons and hackathons and all of those kinds of creative collaborative processes. But I want to start off with a quick question, which if you can type your quick thoughts into the comments, that would be great. So I'd like to know, why are you here today? What are you looking to get out of this presentation? Or, are you just interested to hear about design sprints, or were you not expecting the speaker lineup? Like, what's interesting to you? And if I could hear back from the team, that would be awesome. Okay, thanks. Perfect. Cool. So as those answers are coming in, yeah, I think a quick thing to add about the talk today is that there's a lens that obviously we need to keep in mind. I think, I've given this talk over the years about these different kinds of processes, and I think, in the early days when they were starting to be used and people were very curious about them, through to now when it's kind of a challenging time to hold something that's a collaborative, interactive experience. So yeah, as I go through, I'll be highlighting some tips for how to keep doing this kind of thing, which I think is really necessary, especially when we're working remotely, to try to collaborate in a really seamless way. So yeah. Great. Yeah, so that's a lot of good questions. I think from wanting to get our company to use design sprints, people aren't willing to invest, through to kind of cracking how to use design sprints for specific applications. And I'm sure more will keep coming up. So I'll try to address those through the talk, but I'm sure we can also touch on them in the questions a little bit more deeply. If there are any specific scenarios anyone wants to unpack, I always feel collaborative method therapy is a useful product of these sessions. So great. So I'm going to launch in. As I said, today I'll talk about, ultimately it'll be mostly about design sprints, but I'm going to digress very briefly to talk about where sprints come from, and maybe talk about, how it should feel to do a sprint. I think that's quite useful to talk about, because for people who haven't done sprints, in the past, or maybe done one or two, it's not always clear, is this working? Is this how this is supposed to feel? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So yeah, what is a jam, a make-a-thon? What are the fun, approaches that we see, and why does that matter? So contextually, many of us are designers in the room. I'm sure there's also maybe product managers or engineers or marketing folks or other folks who I haven't mentioned by name, but ultimately, the creative process is just this thing, right? This is the, taking some time to understand the context of the problem that you're looking at, and think about whether that part of the problem is the problem you want to solve, and then to explore different solutions for it, prototype different solutions, to iterate and see, is this a good solution? Is it not? Which aspects of it work well, which don't? And then to try to develop that thing into something that can be brought into production and can be used by people. And of course, the important cycle back, because obviously the thing you launch isn't always the perfect solution. It's usually the first version of the thing, and you're going to build on it further. So I think the important note is this is consistent, whether whatever method you're using, whatever toolkit you use, this is really the high level approach. And I'm going to jump over to, where does this all come from? I think the root of this kind of collaborative methodology really comes from music. So these are some photos of my bandmates from when I was living in Germany, in our ukulele band. And I think that the takeaway here really is that a collaborative methodology, it's something where it's not the same as when you work on something by yourself, right? You're not a composer as you might be in your day-to-day job if you're creating mock-ups or a PRD or writing code, right? It's really a collaborative process, and it's designed for a number of different things, least of which is to bring together sort of the best knowledge of everyone in the room to come to information parity. And that's what that feels like, right? When you're playing a song and you're all kind of seeing where everyone else is going to go, and you're kind of playing off of each other's ideas. That's really when a collaborative method like a sprint is working best. I'm going to touch also on game jams. So game jams are also a great example of a collaborative methodology. So for folks who don't know, there's an event. It's called Global Game Jam. It comes around once a year in February, or end of January, I should say, and it's a 72-hour event over a weekend when you show up, you make teams, and you make a computer game, maybe a board game in that time. And it's a similar type of thing, right? You show up, you have this sort of arbitrary set of constraints that appear, are maybe made up, and you ultimately you play. And I think that's again this example of really kind of taking what someone else brings to the table and building on it and making it your own, and making it the groups, and making it something shared. So these are some games that I've made at the Global Game Jam in the past. Dynafling's good. You can try it online. And I think I've seen a lot of these kinds of social events. Also, I founded the Design Jam, or one of many Design Jam events, DesignJ.am in Munich, and we have it here in London as well when we're not on hiatus due to global pandemic. But again, like you see this kind of collaborative approach, and I think that's ultimately what companies like Google, companies like IDEO, Frog, and pretty much every company now that's making use of these collaborative methodologies is really trying to benefit from. And I think that's difficult in a lot of corporate environments because they're not really designed for that, right? They're designed to create clear ownership and reduce dependencies. And these kinds of, highly interdependent, highly flexible and playful events are really the antithesis of that. So I think it can be quite powerful to not just in terms of solving problems and coming up with great ideas, but it can also be quite powerful to a culture to make these kinds of events, make them a regular part of the day-to-day work. Okay, so this here begins the formal part of my talk. I'm going to speak a little bit to what design sprints look like at Google, and what the difference is between these kind of like playful experiential events is, and what it means to do, just do a design sprint in a work environment and actually get results from that kind of event that can be acted upon. And that's the goal, right? It's to actually get something out of this collaborative event so that you can build the credibility that your company is willing to invest in doing them more and more. Because if you end up creating this like very social experience, there's a benefit to that, a cultural benefit. But there, in parallel, also you need to show that impact, and I think it's very possible to do that. Okay, so flashing back to the beginning of the presentation, and then this again it's a very similar type of structure, right? You begin with understanding the problem. You want to look at the challenge, maybe the market review, the business opportunity, the user research that has been done, competitive overview, design goals. All of these things need to be inputs to the event, and I'll speak to that in a moment. And the other key piece here is really defining. So, what are the main flows of the product, and which piece of that are we focused on? Are we trying to design the whole thing again, or are we, do we see a problem area that we're trying to fix? So that's the first piece. The second piece is about diverging and deciding. So defining the challenges, brainstorming, opening up and looking at all of the possible opportunities. And then focusing down. So focusing on, what are the areas that we think are viable, feasible, desirable solutions, and how do we attack those? Prototyping is straightforward. It's clear, right? We want to build some realistic semblance of this thing so people can get a feel for what that experience is like. We want to use real copy, we want to use real content, we want to give people as realistic of a feeling as possible without actually building anything, right? I think it's really important to kind of Wizard of Oz the experience, right? Make it look and feel like a giant floating head if that's what your product is, but in reality there's a man behind the curtain, and you've got to kind of bring that through. And then the last piece here is to validate. So I think this part, I say it in one word, it's incredibly complicated, right? Do you know if people can use this? Does it make sense? But also, do you know if people will use this? And I think will use this is one of the hardest problems, right? It's when we invest and build and launch this, will it work? And the best judgment we can make about that, which is usually a good guess. Okay, so I want to break down each of these pieces briefly. I think it's important to do that, but I think I'll glide over a little bit because I think I want to give more of an overview and then try to dig in a bit more in the questions. So if you see something you're interested in here and you need to know more, just ask, because I'd love to wax lyrical on that for you. But I think here, when we're trying to understand the problem, I think starting with the challenge statement, and this is kind of it's a moment when in planning your sprint, you need to think a lot about who's in the room, how big is the group. So if you think about, I often think about the difference between the design sprint as it was kind of originally designed for the Google Ventures team, or created for the Google Ventures team. Jared Knapp and Braden and Daniel and John, they were kind of looking inside of Google Ventures at the companies that Google Ventures was investing in, that still is invested in, and those small startups or moderately sized startups were facing problems, right? They may know that they need to bring their product to market, or they might know that this piece of the product's not working, or maybe our customer support is really suffering, right? There's a concrete problem, and that problem is very tangible and very painful for the leadership. So I think in a case like this, where the room is small, you kind of have the stakeholders in the room, and you can, you have a small group of people who are actively tasked with solving the problem. I think that's really what the Google Ventures method was designed for, and that's what it works well for. And it differs a little bit from the version of the Google Ventures guys' sprint methods and how that was translated into the company Google, right? Because Google is a very big company. It has the complexity of a big company. Nadia Dierkova was responsible for kind of commodifying that and making it work well for large groups of people, where the problem is partially to solve the problem, but the problem is also to evangelize the solution, to create alignment, to create information parity, and to really make it go smoothly when you have a room full of 20, smart, opinionated people who all want to have their say. So I think that's that question of like, who am I designing this sprint for is really, really important. And you have to approach it as a designer. So anyway, coming back to understand, when you think about the challenge statement, if you've got a small room of people, you can, start the day with a session where you say, like, look, we're going to define the challenge statement. Here's the draft that I came up with when I, spoke to everyone about this session. Does this sit right with everyone? Let's discuss it. Let's unpack it. Let's cross things out and write new words in. I think when it comes to a big group, a lot of these pieces, the challenge statement, but also a lot of pieces within the design process, that needs to be, you've got to do the legwork ahead of time, right? You've got to go meet with all of the stakeholders, and you've got to talk to them about how they see the challenge statement. You've got to write it out, and you've got to share it out, and you've got to vet it ahead of time. The work for some of these pieces, setting up the sprint when you've got a big group, it needs to happen in advance, and it needs to, really the sprint is more about kind of everyone seeing that they're aligned on those core pieces. And then because they see that, that means that they're able to diverge and explore. So coming back to understand, I think the challenge statement, as I've just said, these pieces, when I say business opportunity, technical opportunity, the competitive analysis and the user research, a great way to do that. And again, if you have a smaller group, this works better, is to run interviews. So bring in your head of marketing, or bring in your head of customer support, bring in your technical lead, and just take 15 minutes to interview them about the problem that you're starting to tackle. And the thing that this does, and it's magic, is it have them spend 3 minutes explaining it, and then take 15 minutes to ask them, and let the group ask them questions. And that will bring your group up to information parity incredibly fast. It'll be, the moments when everyone starts to see, oh, they don't understand how our system is implemented, or they don't understand what kinds of problems our customers have when they call up. Like, that's when you start to easily create this information parity. But it also, again, shifts the culture. It makes people understand that everyone else in the room is an expert, and they have information to share. And that, again, opens people up and lets them start to have that psychological safety to be generative and to be exploratory. It won't happen all at once, but it will happen. The tip here, obviously, is you can do this in person, or you can do this still during COVID with video calls. It works just as well. Obviously, you need to think about the logistics. If their connectivity is poor, you want to get them on a phone call instead. But you can make it work, and I think it can work well. I actually had a sprint today that I think worked well, so that's one example. So one thing to note, I think, as you're doing your remote sprints, especially with this kind of understand phase, it's great to use tools like having digital Post-its. So if you want to write out notes that can be then mapped, we write out how might we. So when you listen to a presentation and you hear, we hear that our customers are really confused by the big button, how might we make the big button more clear? And that's what we might write on the sticky note. And then you might put those all in a slide deck and group them into groups to start mapping, and again, generating that information parity, seeing all of us had this kind of question. Maybe this is an important question for us to answer. Okay, let's talk briefly about defining. I think this is quite a challenging one for people, because you have to start to focus, right? So in this phase, you might map out your user journeys. You might do this just on a whiteboard with a marker, right? Just draw it out and let people see it, and ask people in the room, right? Does this look right to you? Is this the correct reflection of our map, or am I missing something? Do we all have a complete picture of this flow? And once that's defined, you can start to talk again as a small group, or maybe in advance if you're a large group, about what is our goal here? What is the success criteria? And these things can be done in a variety of ways. You might do them in a document. You might do them, in a sprint, I would just do it in person. I would say, like, let's talk about what our success criteria are for the sprint and for the product. And, we'd write it out on the whiteboard and we would discuss it. And maybe if it was a big group, I would write that into a deck and I would have people comment on it. We are using Figma a lot right now. I actually haven't used Miro as much. I think people are really keen on it. It sounds like there's a lot of interest there. I'm primarily using Figma. It works pretty well in terms of just like, grab like a sticker sheet of some symbols and signs, and most people can figure out how to use it. You might have to push if there's any part of your team that's not already using it or isn't that comfortable with sort of design tools, you might have to push a little. But get in touch with them directly. Ask them, have you got your license yet? Do you need any help? But once it's in there, and everyone can start using it. And for anyone who hasn't used it, it's like Google Docs for Sketch. So it's really like being able to kind of draw in the same space, write in the same space, comment in the same space. It works well. So Divergent. I think this is the phase of the sprint where you're really starting to explore solutions to all of these problems you've come to understand more deeply. This is a photo of a piece of paper folded a few times to create 8 different squares to do this crazy 8s activity, right? Where you have a minute for every square and you have to fill it in with a bunch of different ideas. And I think this kind of thing can be really valuable for looking at different parts of your solution, especially the details. I think at a high level, though, I usually try to give it a bit more time rather than pushing people to go really quickly. I might give them 15 minutes for this and say, like, just fill in as many as you can. Because I think what I found is that, stress actually doesn't make people more creative, and it makes them less thoughtful. And I think creating kind of a thoughtful environment and allowing people to diverge with tools like Crazy Eights, then like letting them, share what they've done with everyone else in the group. Everyone else can see what they've done. Then to go again, maybe do another Crazy Eight, do a solution sketch. The iterative piece of it's really important, and the sort of cross-pollination, looking at everyone else's stuff and seeing what they did. Oh, I like that, I'm going to steal that, right? Like that kind of cross-pollination, that riffing is really valuable. When we're doing this in the new world, we tend to do sketching and then shooting. So we'll sketch it on paper and take a photo, put it in the deck, and then talk it through quickly. Another good way to do it is a lot of people are doing now is the like I have an iPad and I draw it on my iPad and I share my iPad to the screen. I think that works quite well for a lot of folks. If you've got an old Wacom tablet, now's the time to pull it out. But find a way to kind of make your ideas visible, make them drawn. If anyone has questions about how to get groups of people to draw, ask me about that later. Okay, so decision making. I think this is really, really painful. This is a really hard thing for groups of people to do, especially people who aren't, like groups of people that aren't used to doing it together, and doubly so for any group where the psychological safety is not as high as it should be. A couple of good things to do. So the first thing I think that, and this comes from the Google Ventures guys, sprint methods, just be clear about who the deciders are in the room. I think, a lot of groups, and especially when it comes to like Silicon Valley, there's this strong culture of flat hierarchies and, everyone has a say. And I think that's really, really valuable. But if you have a startup and you have a CEO who's going to make the decision, or you have a technical lead who's going to like be the person who has to live for the next 5 years with the stack we choose, and they're going to decide, like, it's just helpful to be open about that and be explicit. So if there are those kinds of people on your team, make it known at the beginning. Just say, look, so-and-so is going to be the designated decider for those moments when we need to make a big decision. Like, that's fine. I think if it's true, the group will be okay with it. And then just give them the final say in the right moments. So that might be a moment where, we've created a bunch of sketches of different, pieces of the flow. We need to pick and choose, one or two ideas. They're going to be combined into a single flow, and that will go into a testing session at the end of the sprint. That's the moment where, first you might do a group dot vote. So get everyone in the room to put their dots on the areas they're interested in. Then once everyone has looked over and talked about those dots, why did we put that there? What was interesting? I had questions, all of that kind of thing. And the deciders have listened to all of that. They've benefited from the expertise of their team. Then you can say, okay, great, everyone take a break and pull the deciders aside and say, okay, now we're making a decision. This is what we're going to do. Like, which ideas of these were the most interesting to you that we're going to test. And then you can pull those together and put them into that single flow. I think one thing to keep in mind, by the way, is that those moments are really the hardest moments in a sprint, and they need to be facilitated very skillfully. You need to make sure that you're getting good coverage over the different ideas. You need to make sure the flow is complete so it can, be correctly tested. Like that's a skill moment for the facilitator, and it helps to think about it in advance. Important COVID tip. Yeah, you can dot vote in slides. So that's a really useful thing to do. We've done it a few times lately. Just make a template with different colored dots and tell everyone you get 3 dots, and then they can put the dots in the pictures in the various slides. It works really, really well. It's a good way to run a crit when you want to do it remotely. Okay, almost last but not least, the prototype. So we need to build something based on those ideas. So creating mock-ups, and I personally, over the years, I've gravitated more strongly towards high fidelity mock-ups. I think there is still some value in testing at low fidelity, but it's rare. I think, we have fantastic tools these days that allow us to have these really high fidelity, really accurate prototypes, and we don't have to ask people to imagine, pretend the content's going to be in here, or we can be really specific. So I think there's still a place for low fidelity when you're genuinely not sure what it is that, what direction do we want to go? We want to get some general feedback on this. We want to signal. But that's rare. I think it's much more common that you're iterating on an existing product or you're solving for a specific area and you have some concrete ideas. Then, I think it's great to just build something in Figma that, you can put in front of users. This is a really challenging problem when you want to test remotely with something that's a little more complex. If anyone's dealing with that right now, ask me about that, because we can dig into that quite deeply. And I think it's a very, very interesting problem, but probably only interesting for those of you having to do it. Last but not least, validation. I think validation, it serves two important purposes. So first, the questions and those success criteria that you've thought about at the very beginning of the sprint, like, the reasons you're doing this, can we get customers to buy our product online? Can we make the big blue button make sense? Whatever your questions are, you need to see, did we solve it, right? Did we, do the thing we set out to do in a way that is sufficient? And I think the best way to do that is to put that thing in front of people and run them through it, right? And I won't go deeply into how user testing works today, obviously, but I think the main thing to do is make sure that the team that has participated in the sprint obviously has access to attend the user testing. We might do that remotely. In more boring times, we might have just used a user testing facility, right? We have spaces in our office where you can put a person in front of a computer or put a person in front of a phone and say hey, can you try this out? And that can be video fed to your team so that they don't have to all be sitting there staring at that poor person. But now you can always use something like usertesting.com to try it out remotely. You can recruit and have people video call in. You can have them just audio call and screen share. There's a lot of options. And I think that allows you to give greater access to your team, which is really important, right? They can not only see what does it actually look like if your product succeeds or fails, but it also creates this culture of it's just an idea. We try it out. It's not too expensive, and we see if it works. And if it works, great. And if not, we throw it away, because we don't pursue bad ideas. We iterate on them and we make them work. So yeah, that's basically that. The last point I want to make here is just to remember to celebrate with your team. So share the outcomes, share them with the stakeholders, document them tangibly, take lots of photos, take lots of screenshots if you're doing it remote. And House Party is a really good app if you want to socialize with the team afterwards, but not be in the same video call you've been in all day. So that's it. And remember the power of the follow-up email. So remember to send a summary to all the stakeholders saying, look, this is what we did. These are the outcomes we had. You can watch the user testing videos here. And our summary is, if we do X, it will be successful. Or if we do Y, that won't be successful. We need to try something different. And that way the stakeholders can actually see the value of their investment and be willing to invest again. We're not going to try it out today because that's a lot of time. So obviously, this sprint book, it's one of my favorites, and I don't say that lightly. I think there's a lot of different approaches, but I really think that the guys were really thoughtful about all of the different methods. If you want to nerd out about it, I really do think they've thought about it, and I'm happy to chat more. Steve Krug, Rocket Surgery Made Easy. This is a perfect guide if you need to do usability testing. You want to do it for your sprint, but you don't have user research resources on your team. You should, but the team will see the value of that soon. So in the meantime, this is a great resource. It's got a lot of checklists and things you can do to make it work yourself. And that's it. That's everything from me. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Really great event. Really great talk there, Rachel. Really enjoyed that. Some great content there. A lot of questions for yourself as well. I mean, just to begin with, did Matteo and Judyta, did you have any questions at all after Rachel's talk?
Should I start?
Let me unmute first. I do have a question, actually. I bet there are designers out there listening in, leaning in, who don't have the privilege of working in a team, and they work on a solo designer island. It must be quite isolating experience, especially now with the world situation. Do you have any advice? How can you benefit still from design sprints as a solo designer in a company?
Definitely, yeah, it's a great question. I've been there, and I can't believe how many T-shirt requests one gets as a solo designer. Everyone loves a T-shirt to be made. I mean, yeah. So I think the first thing is that it is tricky. I want to first acknowledge, right? Because not because you don't have other designers in the room with whom to run a design sprint, right? You don't need other designers necessarily to run a design sprint. In fact, it can be quite powerful to run it with other members of your team. The thing that's hard, it's really, truly, genuinely hard, is to facilitate a sprint and contribute to it. So, you kind of have to decide if that's the thing you want to do. Probably what I would do in that kind of scenario again is I would do it, by partnering up with someone on the team. Your product manager is often a good partner in this kind of thing, but your engineering lead can be an equally good partner, and have them help tag team running the sprint. It's easier with a smaller team, right? If you've got a smaller team and you're the solo designer, it's harder to run a sprint when it's really big, when you have to herd a lot of cats, and make sure everyone feels heard and make sure everyone has what they need. But if you're smaller, then I think it can work. You tag team with one of your other partners. You might need to do a little legwork ahead just to get people comfortable. When you've got a team of designers and you've all done a few design sprints before, you can easily, leave back some of the extra explanations. Okay, I'm not going to explain again how we do a crazy 8, everyone in the room knows, right? But when you're running it by yourself and there's no one else who's used to doing it, you've really got to communicate. You've got to over communicate about it. So what I would do is just I would plan it a lot further in advance. I would share with people the instructions. I would meet with them one-on-one. I would explain what we're going to do and why. I would say, look, it's really important for you to be there because, you've told me and lead partner that you want to be involved in design at an early stage. You don't want to just be implementing something that comes from above, from, product and UX, and they open their black box and give you the gift of the thing you're going to implement. Like how patronizing, right? You want to be involved. This is where we're starting the discussion. So you need to be there. And so you've got to do all of that extra legwork so that everyone knows, this is the room we're all going to be in. We're going to talk about it. We're going to, hash it out, and we're going to come to understand what some of the good solutions might be. So we're all bought into them, and we're ready to go forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Really good advice.
Brilliant. Thank you, Judyta and Rachel there. I've got a question. Matteo, did you have a question for Rachel as well?
Yeah, of course. I got a few of them. The first one is, have you used something like games, like in the agile environments are used to help to make decisions? I don't know, priority poker or anything like that. It can be something that helps that a hard decision.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't really used games to make decisions. I think I can, hold on. I can look at your face. There we go. Much better. Okay. I think decision making, it is really hard. And I actually think it's just better to treat it seriously, because I think people get really invested, and it's just better to acknowledge hey, this is a hard decision, but don't worry, we're just deciding for the next couple of days. We're not deciding for the rest of eternity. We're going to try this out. If it works, great. If not, there's lots of other ideas to try. Good methods though. I think the dot voting method that the GV Sprint book has, where where you have a big collection of solutions, right? I've got 10 different sketches from people, and they all believe this is the way to do their idea is the thing, right? The way they advise, and the way I actually really, really like this approach, is you put up all 10 on the wall or in your slide deck. You give everyone time to look at them, really look at them and try to understand them, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, right? And to put dots on pieces that are interesting or or maybe they hate that part. They should put in a dot on that and want to talk about that. That doesn't work, right? And why does it not work? And then, as a facilitator, I would describe the sketches. I wouldn't let the person present them, because I think that really encourage the like pitch approach, where people who are great at describing their ideas and explaining their ideas can like hand wave over an idea that maybe isn't that great. And you don't want to decide on something just because of who came up with that idea. You want to go based on the merit of the idea itself. And then group goes through, talk about the dots. If there's nothing to say on a sketch, like you don't need to say anything. This is a very nice sketch. Thank you very much. We're moving on, right? You don't need to dwell on the stuff that's not working well. You want to dwell on the stuff that is. And then, at the end, right, I would say, okay, thank you, everyone. And then I would pull the deciders aside, and I would say, okay, like time to put your big dot, your big sticky dots on there to decide, like, what we're gravitating towards. And I think that does a pretty good job of it. There's still a need to, like, pull some of the ideas that have been chosen and somehow Frankenstein them together into a usability test, and that part is hard. I think it works well, and people seem to, once they've gone through that process and understood things more deeply, then they seem more open to, like, okay, like this is what we're going with for now. It's important to frame it in that language too.
Brilliant. Sorry, and I got another one that is related with the prototyping, but not only with that. So what kind of things you usually prototype? Did you ever prototype anything that is like hardware, as I did before, or I don't know, services or stuff that are not digital at all?
Yeah, totally. And I caught the tail end of that discussion, and it was really interesting. Actually, my background's also, I think yours is also industrial design, but maybe I'm wrong. Mine's also is a product design degree, and so I also, have vague memories of learning about like material, like, width tolerances or something like that, and battling with AutoCAD and all that. It's a good time, but I think what to say about that? Besides the Wizard of Oz piece, I think is really interesting, right? The idea that people need to kind of just feel immersed in the experience of the things. So, when I was at Emily Carr, when I was in university, we were prototyping things that were, it was pre-iPad, but we had iPad solutions because we were working with the Children's Hospital emergency room, and we wanted doctors to be able to interact with their patients. They had to interact with the computer at the time, and it was like a big clunky thing between them and their patient, right? So we thought, like, well, something that's more like a tablet, where then we could put the software on there and they could, put it in. I think we used like cardboard and like paper with like flippy sheets. That was interesting. I think there's a lot of approaches you can take. Service design, I think, having like a skit is the wrong word, like a play is the wrong word, but it's kind of something where you act it out. I think that is a good way of giving people that experience, and trying to like see how it feels, and does any part of this make sense to me. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Great question there, Matteo, and a great response. We do have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to try and pick out a few for yourself. One from Shebel. A normal sprint is 2 weeks long. There are so many UX processes. Which are the key ones you would incorporate within 2 weeks?
Ooh, 2 weeks. I wonder if you're thinking also about like a development sprint versus a design sprint. There's a lot of like jargon that is floating in the world today. I've run design sprints anywhere from I ran 1 day sprints I've run 1 day sprints in my life. I wouldn't do it again. It's not enjoyable. But like I think I would happily do like a 2-day sprint with a partially optional 3rd day. Like, people often ask the question, like, how short of a sprint can I get away with and still get value out of? And I think like this is a better framing of the question. It's, what's important and how can we do it? I think the answer is just like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you need to get, right? And it's about, do we want to just get some ideas and look at those ideas? Do we want to like go from the beginning to end, right? Like, do we want to like really understand the problem, or do we have a lot of really good research? We already understand it pretty well, but maybe we need a little time to talk about it together and like make sure we all are on the same page. have we done the user research already, or do we need to do it? Hopefully they've done it already, but they should do that before. Like, have we, have we diverged already? Have we already done a lot of design work and we're just like picking and choosing some things, or do we need to do it all? And then the important thing a lot of people ask is like, well, do we really need to do the user testing? Like, yes, please do it. but like, do we need to do it in the session, right? Like, maybe that can happen next week, and we'll all still watch the highlights clip. Like, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of put it together. If the Google Ventures guys were here, they would say, like, I would never do less than 5 days. Like, do it all, do it as we have it. But I think, and I think there's validity to that. Like anytime you condense it, people are people and you get less out of it, right? Like, trying to get people to go faster. Well, I mean, they go faster, but they think worse also. Or like, you don't have a long enough lunch break. By day 2, people are burned out because they haven't eaten properly and they're getting a little cranky. Like, all of the pieces, the way they've thought about it, they thought it out that way for a wide variety of reasons, and that's nice. But as you start to get familiar with it, I think you can start to pull in the pieces that are, that do what you need to do with that, like, collaborative workshop that is maybe 2 hours long and is maybe like 2 weeks long.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for that, Rachel. A few questions from Laura and also Paul to indecisiveness. So Stuart has a question for you. Hi, Rachel. I see a lot of benefits to the design sprint methodology, but have also encountered a few issues like groupthink, indecisiveness, hippo dominating the discussion, and the tunnel vision. She said, have you experienced these issues too? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, really good question. I feel like the fact that you're identifying those problems is already a good starting point, right? And I think most of them can be addressed by like doing early legwork. So including making sure you have the right people in the room. So in particular, tunnel vision is really well defeated by like, I don't have a good proper phrase for this, but a person who's kind of a shit disturber. Like someone who needs to, a few of those people, right? Not the person who's like belligerent. No, you don't want those in the room to discourage them, but someone who is a little contrarian. There's a lot of value in having someone who's who gravitates towards the thing that people don't gravitate towards. That person is going to reduce the tunnel vision because they're going to keep coming up with new ideas, and that's really valuable. But sometimes it's worth it to just like lean right in there, like, oh, everyone's focused on this idea. That might be a good idea, and like, let's try it out. And if you the experienced, smart design facilitator don't think that idea is strong, maybe it's a good time for an A/B test in the user testing session. We're gonna prototype and test 2 ideas. That's very possible. Let's do it. And so you kind of come up with different ways to flex, depending on the scenario and depending on the state. I'm just trying to think of a couple of the other issues that were mentioned. So there's tunnel vision. There's the person who's throwing their weight around to try to or who speaks. He's the person like me who's always talking. The thing you can do about that, I think getting everyone's voice heard is really, really critical, because the whole point of the sprint is to get everyone to information parity. And the reason you have everyone in the room is because they have, expertise or information that other people in the room don't have. So a couple good methods for that. So a lot of the old school methods, or a lot of the sort of early methods, use brainstorming. I never use brainstorming anymore. So I never have a scenario where we all like shout out our ideas. I don't think it works well, because it doesn't allow people to kind of consider and think about like, well, here are my 5 ideas. Which of these ideas makes sense? Oh, this is the one idea that makes sense. This is the idea, right? If you're in a stressful, fast moving situation, you're just gonna be like picking up all your ideas and throwing them down. So yeah, basically brainwriting is the solution for this. Basically, any time where you want to generate, it's a time where, we're all going to sit down for 15 minutes and we're going to, draw our sketches. We're going to show them to each other. Then we're going to draw some more sketches, and it's sort of very structured. Or in other cases, you need to write some ideas down and you want to stick them up. Then you would, take 5 minutes. Everyone writes down as many ideas as they want, but we're just going to take 2 ideas from everyone. And so then, we go around the room and say them. So having sort of structures and processes that are designed to kind of universalize or make everyone's voice heard, I think that's really important, because there's always this sort of natural like noisy person and quiet people, and it's your job as a facilitator to kind of elevate and make sure everyone's getting heard.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Rachel. Definitely a great question there as well. Yeah, so I know everyone's probably hungry now, and obviously coming to an end. But if everyone can keep asking questions, we can actually email them across as well. So I know that some of the speakers will answer this afterwards. Just one final last question for yourself, Rachel, just to end the event on. We've got a question from TextBax, and I know he's asked this to a few other the speakers, but just wanting the same question but from another perspective. As a 15-year-old UI UX designer, what would be the first step that what would you sort of take off within his UI and UX career further? What would you advise as his first step?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of different paths you could take. I think I took them all. I think, when I was younger, I freelanced for some clients. It was not smooth, but it was educational. That was good. I think, I was making like websites and things like that. It's very accessible, but if you were to do that, I would take some time to learn about how to make sure you have a good contract with your clients, so you have good client experiences, but that can be valuable. Obviously, there are great degree programs out there now. When I studied interaction design, the year I graduated was the year before my university started offering an interaction design degree. But there are great degrees in interaction design right now in the UK, in Europe, in Canada, the US, anywhere. I mean, those are the countries that I know about them in. So that's definitely a path you could take. You could try to find your way into a company as an intern. I think that will require a bit more experience. So it's kind of there are a lot of resources where I would like learn and practice. There are great resources online these days where you can just try it and see and create stuff and see how it feels. But I think like, I have a degree in industrial design, and that has been very, very useful. I definitely would do that again. I think much of what you learn is in practice, and so if you do want to study, I would very strongly encourage to move towards a project-based program. So any program you look at, evaluate, am I going to be doing projects? Am I going to be doing group projects? Because all of your work is likely to be a group project in the future. Will people crit my work? Will I get feedback directly on my work from people who know and people who have experience in the industry? Because I think those are the really valuable things. And then obviously like the collaboration with your classmates and the connections to the industry, that offers a lot of value as well. But that like doing the thing over and over, getting the reps in before you have to like be in the industry and like, really get batted around if you haven't got it, then that's what that offers. So yeah, I think there's many paths.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to all of our speakers tonight. It's been a great event. And also thank you to Alex from Pusher for all of his help as well. And also everyone watching it as well. It's been a great audience and some great questions as well throughout the event. So yeah, hopefully see everyone at our next event as well, and keep posted on the Product Circle group chat.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.